I've never owned a precon. Wizards of the Coast has been releasing pre-constructed commander decks ever since I started playing in 2011, and with increasing frequency, and I've just kept on ignoring them. The reason for this is simple enough. I didn't start playing Commander until 2014, at which point I felt like a skilled enough player to build my own mono black removal pile to piss off my friends. However, as I've continued to make videos and exist more in the MTG space, it's become increasingly clear to me that precons play a major role in the way people learn and conceptualize the EDH format, so I figure I should take a moment to engage with the world of precons. I polled my patrons, and they thought I should look at the Blame Game precon, so I'm going to do just that. I'm going to break down what I think the deck is trying to do, how well it's accomplishing that plan, and some potential improvement routes for making it function better. Let's first break down what the commander is offering. Nelly's first ability contains the Suspect component, which offers immediate evasion by disabling a blocker, as well as the Goad component, which offers a way to keep threats away from our life total as long as Nelly keeps attacking, and guarantees that our opponents will be attacking each other. The second ability is a source of draw that can offer up to 3 cards per turn cycle, while also feeding opponents that resource as a reward for hitting each other, whether due to being compelled or otherwise. This is a pretty fun package. The first ability will scale to great effect over time, and the second ability offers some fun politics gameplay and discourages our opponents from removing Nelly for fear of losing out on those sweet, sweet cards. Less to the point of this video, the flavor here is great. A commander that is constantly accusing people of murder, which is causing the accused to lash out in order to curry favor as long as Nelly is around. Good stuff. To go along with the commander, the deck is running lots of cards with the intent of getting our opponents to attack each other, rather than attacking us. There are a bunch of Goad cards, there are cards that give people advantages for attacking our opponents, there are cards that punish people for attacking us, and so on. Basically, the deck is trying to control the mid-game by getting our opponents to fight amongst themselves, and Nelly draws us additional cards when they do this. This card draw should hopefully fuel a powerful late game, where a suite of bigger creatures means that once our opponents are dropping in life total and dwindling in number, we can take control of the game with our board state. So that's the game plan. But how effectively can the deck accomplish it? Well, there are a handful of things that the deck is doing decently well when it comes to fundamentals. It has 8 cards that I can broadly label as draw, which isn't a bad number when paired with a commander that will likely be drawing 1 to 2 cards per turn cycle. There are also 11 cards that one could label as ramp, which is a solid number, and this also works well with a creature base that includes a number of higher costed beaters. Finishing off the final opponent is something I'd naturally worry about for a Goad deck, but I think the creature base is just beefy enough that the deck should be able to finish off a game a lot of the time, as long as the commander has been getting in the desired number of draw triggers. The deck contains 9 cards that I'd call removal, and although I'm a little concerned at how high cost most of it is, I'm mostly willing to overlook that due to how many other options the deck has for interacting with opposing creatures. The deck also includes 10 extra Goad cards, which bolster the commander's card draw and will also help keep the heat off us even if our commander-based Goad engine goes offline. What I don't like is the amount of other player protective cards in the deck. I tallied up all the cards that discourage or disallow attacking us in some way, and the total for these was 33 cards. 1/3 of the deck is trying to get our opponents to attack each other instead of us. And I get that that's a big thing the deck is trying to do, but 33 slots is way too many for a task that won't win or prevent our opponents from winning on its own. Like, okay, the ideal scenario is that you'll have key opposing creatures being tossed around wildly, with opposing game plans and life totals crumbling before our very eyes, but how often will this actually happen? There will be games where our opponents are developing horrifying win cons that don't use combat, and we just sit there twiddling our thumbs as we goad their utility 2/3s into Johnny No Board over there and draw them into the gas they need to murder us. My guess is that different defensive cards are meant to serve somewhat different purposes throughout the game, but this is quite inefficient slots-wise. Additionally, and this is kind of a precon classic, but the mana base is bad. 37 lands might be an okay count in the abstract, but it includes 11 solely colorless producing utility lands. This results in the deck having 20 white sources and 17 red sources between its artifacts and lands. That's right, this 37 land and 6 rock 2-color mana base has symbol numbers that are similar to those of the budget 30 land 4-color mana base from my lands video. And this deck has like 10 double red cards in it. You need 26 red sources to consistently cast a Vengeful Ancestor on curve, and yet here we are with 17. Wizards, please, just put things that tap for colored mana in your precons. Just do it. I know you can. Thank you. I ran 15 playtests with the deck, and my previous hunches were pretty well backed up. The deck can have a decent mid-game curve out with solid ramping and drawing capabilities, but it frequently has mana issues, and also frequently gets stuck on a handful of nothing but niche defensive cards. Another issue that was on my radar, but which became much more clear in playtesting, was that the deck has only a handful of good 3-drops, and basically no 2-drops other than mana rocks. When I playtested it, I was aggressively mulliganing for early plays, which led to the deck having what I'd consider to be a decent curve out 8 of the 15 playtests. But I imagine a new player piloting the deck would probably happily keep a more average hand for the deck, one that plays nothing on turn 1 and 2, a weird enchantment on turn 3, and commander on turn 4. Which I guess might work out in a game with other precons, but leaving your 2-drop slot on the table in a 2-color deck is not good and will hurt your chances of winning. So yeah, there are definitely issues here, but overall this deck has a very fun, useful commander, and a pretty solid mid-game plan of influencing the attacks of the game and leveraging politics to its favor. It's pretty well-rounded in most areas, with the 3 standout issues being mana base, mana curve, and an excess of defensive cards. So how do we go about tuning it up? For improving this deck, I want to maintain the affordability and spirit of the deck, but smooth out some of the rough edges. First of all, I would want to cut a bunch of defensive cards, because they are taking up too much goddamn space in this deck. Specifically, I dislike the ones whose use cases are too narrow, whose effect is too limited, or which cost too much mana. And there are about a quarter of these that I would cut right off the bat. From there, I think it's up to the player to some extent. I opted to cut an additional 6 for my final deck list. In their place, there are a number of things that could be added, and I think a good option to somewhat fill the same role is cards that grant haste. If Nellie dies on the declare combat step, well, that sucks for us, but if she dies any other time, we want to be able to play her again and keep her Wall of Goat up. I'd also add a bit of board protection in. If Nellie gets destroyed, we're vulnerable to attacks, and if the board gets wiped, we lose basically all momentum. Next up, let's talk mana base. The goal here is simple. We want several more symbols of each color, and to get there, we cut colorless lands and rocks for ones that produce colored mana. I like a lot of the utility lands in principle. Evasion is good, Graveyard Hate is good, Draw is good, so I'm going to start with the ones I see as adding basically nothing to the deck. Temple of the False God is weird and very bad if you're running less than, 43 other lands. Reliquary Tower and Thought Vessel are next up on my shit list. This deck doesn't draw insane numbers of cards, and it also doesn't need to hold up a bunch of interaction and niche tech pieces. I'd also cut Care Keep, and I'd consider cutting some number of Scavenger Grounds, Throne of the High City, and Sunhome if the deck was going to stay at the same land count, though these cards at least have some identifiable purpose here. Speaking of land count, I think there are 2 options for this deck with regard to mana curve. Option A would be to keep the higher curve, add a couple lands, and add 4 to 5 2-cost mana rocks in order to make sure that we're able to swing with the commander on turn 4 as often as possible. I'd also fill out the deck with a few more beaters in order to guarantee that we'll have the raw power to finish off the final player. Option B would be to drop the curve and add a bunch of 2 and 3 drop creatures that could lead to us having a more aggressive game plan. I think either of these 2 game plans would be valid, but in my list I went for option A, as it seemed more in line with the original plan of the deck. Though you could certainly make a much better deck with this commander, my goal here was to only swap out 20 cards, to scrape out a bit of the precon jank factor and make the deck play more smoothly. I posted the original deck as well as the improved version I made in the description, so you can check out the changes I made, and let me know in the comments if you think I utterly bastardized the entire point of the deck. This is also a bit different than most of my other videos, so you can let me know if this sort of content is something you want to see more of in the future. Alright, bye now.